Welcome to Miss Duncan's AP Euro Unit 4 Absolutism Notes. We are doing content check number 3, and we're going to cover the English Civil War, the Glorious Revolution, and all the stuff for part 2 on your study guide. As you can see on this content check, number 3 here, there's a lot of questions, and a lot of them, again, are just doubling what you're going to have for your study guide there, but it really gets into the heart of what's going on in this time period. So before we get started, I just want to say at the very end there, the last one is summarize all of the Stuart's views on absolute monarchies and on absolute monarchism, and what's going on with the absolute divine right monarchs versus England and their idea of Magna Carta and people's rights. So let's go ahead and jump on into it here if I can get the page to change. So constitutionalism. We said this at the very beginning of the unit, that England is a little bit different. The rest of the countries, absolutism, they've got a king that may or may not have a parliament and a states general, or in Russia a Duma, but in Germany, I think we're going to talk about a Reichstag. In England, it's just a little bit different because things go back to the Magna Carta. So they've got this constitutional monarchy that they're going to have to deal with. Now, with the death of Queen Elizabeth, we all know that the next in line, because she didn't have any children, we've talked about how the Stuart family takes over. And so she's got a Catholic legal heir, and that's where we get into Mary, Queen of Scots, being the next legal heir. And there's a lot of story that goes into Mary, Queen of Scots, and how she's under house arrest when Elizabeth takes over, and you can kind of wade through all of that if you would like. But the bottom line is that Mary, Queen of Scots, up in Scotland, has got a son. She is the next in line, and she really stays out of Elizabeth's business for the most part. They're cousins. She doesn't really want to take over. She's kind of letting her stay to her own devices. And it really isn't until Philip enacts his plot to come and take England away from Elizabeth that Mary, Queen of Scots, gets herself into a little bit of trouble. It's like I said, the woman's on house arrest for like 20 years or something. And she's got, she really gets herself into trouble when Philip says, hey, why don't you join me? This is, of course, when he is leading the Armada up to take back England, and once Elizabeth finds out that Mary is plotting against her, there really is no help for Mary at that point. So she really, once she signs her name to a note letting Philip know that she will help him, Walsingham spies, Elizabeth's advisor, Walsingham, he grabs that note and he takes it back to Elizabeth and he says, see, she cannot be trusted. So Mary, Queen of Scots, is going to get her head cut off by the order of Elizabeth. She signs a Treaty of Berwick, though, and names James, King of Scotland, James VI, King of Scotland, as her subsequent heir. So here's a quote by James I. Kings are not only God's lieutenants upon earth and sit upon God's throne, but even by God himself they are called gods. And dispute what God says is blasphemy. If that doesn't smack of divine right monarch, I have absolutely no idea what you could possibly put any better than that. He is saying, I am like a god. God would even say, I'm like godlike. So, obviously, James I is a divine right monarch, which really gets us into the heart of the matter. James I, first of the Stuart line, is a divine right monarch, and he is going to alienate lots and lots of people, starting with the Puritans, because he comes from Presbyterian Scotland. So a lot of the things that he's going to do is going to be more Presbyterian in nature. He supports the Church of England, and because he really makes that difference that I'm not going to take a lot of the religious ceremony out. I'm going to keep it kind of the way it is with the Elizabethan settlement, and actually wants to add a lot more ceremonial things that feel like Catholicism. Because he does this, the Puritans are going to really get miffed and really get their panties in a twist. So this is the time when the Puritans, aka the Pilgrims, they move to the New World. So as Thanksgiving's coming up in about a month and a few weeks, then hey, great, now you know where the Puritans came from and the Pilgrims. He's going to be pushed to purify the Church of England of its Catholic ceremonies, but of course he isn't going to do that. And the people who are asking for this purification, these Puritans, so to speak, are typically Calvin. They hold to a lot of Calvinist ideas. His son, Charles I, is going to take over after him, and he is going to be another divine right absolute monarch, and his partner in crime is going to be a guy named William Laud, who he sets up as the Archbishop of Canterbury. And William Laud is going to just further upset the Puritans. We'll see why in a couple of slides here, so hold that thought. But a lot of this goes back to the Magna Carta. England is different. In 1215, they had forced King John to sign this document stating that the nobles have rights, that the king can only do something if a majority of the nobles agree with him. So they're setting up the basis for the parliamentary system here. And England has had that in place long before the Stuarts come into power. So in order to get money, and all of the money financial parts on business side is controlled by Parliament. If you're going to tax people, they have to have representation. No taxation without representation should sound familiar. So he has to ask Parliament for money. And Parliament's going to refuse to give him something that had been given to the kings for centuries, and that's called tonnage and poundage. It's a tax upon every cask of wine and on every pound weight that is merchandise that is exported or imported. So for every pound that you export or import, you pay a tax, and this is called tonnage and poundage. And so the kings had really used this to their advantage to pay for a lot of things, but they deny it to Charles. And Charles is going to be getting into a lot of wars, and he's going to need a lot of money. So he uses his wife's dowry. I love this. He forces the nobles to give him loans so he could start a war with Spain. And then when he loses, he forces them to give him another loan to pay for it. And when they won't give him any money, he throws them in jail. So, way to go, Charles. Here's your William Laud, the Archbishop of Canterbury. He is the Archbishop during the 30 Years' War after the Counter-Reformation. A lot of the ceremonies, and I had mentioned this on a previous slide, a lot of the ceremonial things that he wanted to put in place felt a lot like Catholic ceremonies, and that's why the Puritans were having quite a bit of problems. And so the Puritans are Protestant extremists. They're similar to Calvinists. A lot of the no dancing and drinking type activities are going to be put in place by, and laws against this in England are going to be put in place by these Puritans. And they want, again, that pure church, total uniformity of the church. So Elizabeth said, hey, we'll meet in the middle. She was more moderate, and that's going to start these Puritans getting worked up. And by the time we hit Charles I, they've got good, solid backing, lots of people in Parliament, and so they've really got enough people to be in opposition to what's going on. So Charles is going to request some money for war again, and whenever they do, Parliament says, fine, we'll sign off on this. This was kind of like this was their way to get him to do what he wanted. Parliament says, fine, we'll sign off on it as long as you agree to the petition of right. So he gets his money, but in the middle of all of that, after he does get his money, he says, you know what? He decides he's not going to call Parliament again, and he doesn't call them again for the next 11 years. And he's going to raise money by collecting ship money from coastal and inland shipping. Now, let's think about this for a second. A lot of this is going to be warships and things like that, or it's supposed to go towards defense. But instead of using this money for defense, he used it for whatever it was that he wanted to use it for. He does have a balanced budget. He pays for all the stuff that he wants to pay for, that Congress, or excuse me, Parliament isn't giving him money for. The only problem is he's taxing the merchants and the middle class, and they're eventually going to take this out on him. They're going to get very, very upset with him because he is not helping with the governmental defense. And it is going to gain him opposition from the middle class merchants and the landed gentry who objected to the king's attempts to tax without Parliament's consent. This is really going to be the beginning of him digging his grave here. He's made Parliament mad, and that's one thing, but then just about every other part of the country he's going to also upset. So the thing that's really going to, push everything kind of over the edge is he gets into a war with Scotland. He and William Laud are like, hey, Scotland, quit this Presbyterian stuff. You're going to become Anglican. You're going to become more like us. And this is where he really gets into a little bit of a problem. He wants to force them to adopt the Book of Common Prayer. And when they rebel, he's got to have some money. And of course, this is going to mean that he has to call Parliament back again. And when they do, they abolish the king's prerogative court. It's supposed to be prerogative, not whatever the heck that is. There's an extra R there. Prerogative courts, and they're going to execute Laud. They're going to take him down. And this is going to be the beginning of the end for Charles I. Speaking once again on religious matters, and this isn't in your notes, so just listen to it and then maybe summarize it over there to the side. The Puritans, the Protestants, and the Anglican Church were inspired by Calvinist theology. We had talked about that. And they wanted James to get rid of his episcopal system of church organization, where he uses a lot of bishops. But James didn't want to get rid of all these bishops because he appoints the bishops. Then the bishops have got a whole lot of power, and they are beholden to him, to Charles, because he and James, because the king, because they had been put in power by him. But what the Puritans wanted was a more Presbyterian model, like used up there in Scotland. So there's going to be, again, a bit of a misunderstanding between these two people. Another reason for the Puritans to not like James. And of course, that actually helps to explain a little bit as to why today's Anglican Church isn't usually called Anglican. The one that we closely resemble, the one that comes out of England, it's the Episcopalian Church. So getting back to what's going on here, he calls on Parliament again. They execute Laud. There's going to be a rebellion that is going to break out across England. Parliament is going to have attempt to have him recognize something called the Grand Remonstrance. And I do actually have to back up here for just a second. That wasn't a typographical error. When I went out and double-checked a couple things here, it is prerogative courts. But backing up and getting back to our Grand Remonstrance, it is a way to limit the king's power, just like it says up there on the screen. And it is a list of 204 parliamentary grievances from the past decade, and they make a couple demands. They demand that the king name ministers from Parliament that Parliament could trust, and also a group be formed to reform the English Church. In response, Charles tries to seize 5 of the leaders of the House of Commons, and that attempt is going to fail. And this is going to be the beginning of the English Revolution. So he tries to arrest these folks. That's what's going on when it talks about the arrest on our green sheet on the Stuarts. And really, this is going to be kind of like the last straw for Parliament. So they're going to, civil war is going to erupt. Now, I do want to take just a second to talk about the gunpowder plot. Every once in a while you get a question on that. There was a man, a militant Catholic named Guy Fawkes, Fawkes, who attempted to destroy Protestant rule in England by destroying the Protestant aristocracy. And he also tried to kill up, James the First in the midst of all of this. So, the gunpowder plot, Guy Fawkes and his gunpowder plot, takes place on November 5th, 1605. So, there is a famous saying, remember, remember the 5th of November, talking about the gunpowder plot and Guy Fawkes' attempt to kill James the First. During the English Civil War, Charles isn't immediately killed. They are going to actually break off into two types of two sides to this English war. And the Roundheads are the first set. They're the folks who are led by a guy named Oliver Cromwell. He is a major Puritan. He's a very devout Puritan. And he's going to basically take care of everybody who isn't for the king. They technically include people who favor parliamentary monarchy and these would be the Puritans, townspeople, middle class, businessmen, and the people from a Presbyterian-dominated London. Your other side are going to be the Cavaliers, Cavaliers, the Cavaliers. These are your aristocrats, nobles, and church officials who remain loyal to the king. And Charles I is going to be executed eventually during this part of the story. Now, I do have a way to kind of remember who's who on which side. Cavaliers, whenever I think of that, I think of people who are running around on horses. And, of course, only the richest, the best of the best would be riding around on horses. They would have money for a horse. So that's how I remember that those are the folks who are loyal to the king. And then you've got the Roundheads, and we should be looking at a cartoon in class that takes a look at the Roundheads versus the Cavaliers. But of course the Cavaliers are going to be on the losing side because Oliver Cromwell and his new model army are going to chop off Charles I's head. Here's just a little short, quick walkthrough of the English Civil War. Make sure that you know the Petition of Right and the two things that it's going to give: the no taxes without the consent of Parliament, and no one can be imprisoned without due process of law. There's a reason why these sound like our own basis for the legal system in the Bill of Rights, because they flat out are. The limit on royal power is a big deal. The king is summoned to, or compelled to summon Parliament every 3 years. Whether he calls them or not, they have to meet, because again, the people should be represented by the House of Lords and the House of Commons. Quick picture of beheading of someone. I don't know if it's William Laud or if it's of Charles I. Either which way. Ta-da. There you have it. After Oliver Cromwell's death, though, and there's a lot of things that go on with Cromwell, a lot of his policies, etc. Parliament is going to bring back a Stuart to rule. But before we get there, let's just run through some of the things that Cromwell did, and you may want to jot these down as I give them to you. He is going to enact the Navigation Act of 1651. Navigation Act of 1651. And my American Revolution folks, that should sound a little bit familiar, because it's going to play a part in our own American Revolution. It's the act that bars Dutch ships from carrying goods between other countries to England. So they're going to say, nope, sorry, you can't bring us goods. It's also designed to give England greater control over its American colonies, because essentially what it's going to say is you can only trade with the English if you're a colony. So you can't trade with other countries directly. You have to buy them from England. So England can get stuff from France and then sell it to the colonies. And of course there's going to be a huge markup, which is going to lead to all sorts of trouble with the with the colonies, also with the Dutch. He gets into a series of wars and is actually going to weaken the Dutch and get some of the territories back from the Dutch, like New Amsterdam, which is modern-day New York. As a Puritan and his domestic policy, he attempted to impose strict moral code. He censored the press, prohibited sports, closed theaters. So, again, those Puritan views of no drinking, dancing, singing, having fun, all of these are going to be seen under Cromwell's policies. And he's going to have to go up against some radical groups, such as the Levelers or the Quakers. The Levelers, Levellers, want a more egalitarian society, meaning more equity, more equality, a more universal manhood suffrage, so more people to vote, more men actually. And they want a written constitution. The Quakers wanted to get rid of a lot of the religious stuff that was going on, religious hierarchies, and they wanted to allow women to preach at their meetings. And of course, this is not going to go over well with Cromwell. Upon his death, though, his son Richard takes over for some 18 months, but he is very weak and can't quite maintain the military control that Cromwell maintained, so he is going to be out, and they're going to ask Charles I's son, Charles II, to rule instead. The catch is, he has to acknowledge the rights of the people, especially religious rights, before they're going to welcome him back. So Charles II comes in with an even more restricted monarchy than they had in previous years. They're going to pass the Habeas Corpus Act. Hey, we've got habeas corpus here. If you don't know what that is, you need to Google that right now. James II is going to take over, but he's going to have some problems because his first wife, no big deal, but his new wife, his second wife that he gets, is Catholic. And so he, in the beginning, is kind of like secretly Catholic, but before too long, he converts to Catholicism. He loves his wife, and he even has a son. That he raises with this woman, with the Catholic wife that he raises Catholic. So, in the meantime, England is trying to get away from that. They passed the Test Act, barring any major office in England. Any Catholic is barred, cannot get into, cannot have any major office in England. He is going to be challenged. He's going to imprison bishops who refuse to announce his changes. He's going to get into a whole situation, and then England's going to basically feel like they're back to square one, like they need to get rid of this guy yet again. And that's where we get into the Glorious Revolution. So, when he gives up, whoa, what happened there? When he gives up his leadership, when he abdicates, it is known as the Glorious Revolution because it is non-bloody, no bloodshed. No one dies during the Glorious Revolution. He's asked to leave, he goes. And his Protestant daughter from his first wife, Mary, is going to take over. So she will become Mary II. And her husband, William III, he's from over there in the Netherlands. That's our William of Orange. We had heard about some of his relatives. We talked about Philip and them taking over and splitting off into the Spanish Netherlands. But William and Mary are going to take the throne, and Mary is the Protestant daughter of James II. They immediately sign the English Bill of Rights. This is kind of like hey, we'll back you, William and Mary, but you're going to have to give us something. And so they sign the English Bill of Rights. And there are a ton of things that are mirrored in our own Bill of Rights that came from the English Bill of Rights. It also says in your notes that they signed the Act of Union. I'm not sure why it does that. Queen Anne signs the Act of Union in 1707. So you've got William and Mary pictures down there at the bottom. And here they are again because, like I said, he's William III of Orange. And this is where we get into the whole Dutch Netherlands, etc. The House of Orange hold the title of stadholder. These are essentially kind of like we had the princes in Germany that were in charge of different territories. The Netherlands is broken up into different territories, and the leaders, the princes, the nobility there, the people who rule, are stadholders. And William of Orange is one of them. So every once in a while you get questions on stadholders. Make sure you know what the heck that is. And we're getting into the golden age of the Dutch, and I'm going to handle that in another video. We'll get into some Dutch art, etc. So let's see here. I think we're almost done with content check number 3. Alrighty, so here's your content check number 3. Again, remember, a lot of these are just your basic answers, and then down there for summarize the Stuarts' views on absolute monarchies. All of these should be hopefully leading you up to this idea that they tried divine right monarchy system, and that just did not work at all. And then, of course, Parliament and with the Commonwealth during Cromwell takes back that power from the king. And every time Charles I has to call Parliament back before he gets his head lopped off, they're trying to take back more and more power and reduce the amount of power that the king is trying to exert, because these guys come in and just think that they're going to rule England absolutely, and that is not going to go over in England, period. Thanks, and I'll see you on content check number 4 for the Dutch Masters.